This is John Greenhut, and if your teeth are stained from coffee, tea, or smoking, Power Swabs is the answer. In 5 minutes, you'll see 2 shades wider teeth, and in 7 days, 6 shades. Even better, there's no messy strips or trays that you'll have to leave in your mouth for an hour. Just swab your teeth for 5 minutes, and you're done. To try Power Swabs, call 1-800-679-0969. Your bright white smile will have your friends talking about how great you look. Try it risk-free. 1-800-679-0969. That's 1-800-679-0969.
Have you heard? Proactive Plus is faster and better than ever. Stay tuned for a 1,000,000 bottle giveaway, and you'll also receive free shipping. With Proactive Plus, your acne can heal, and you can help prevent new breakouts. Don't miss this limited time offer. We're going to let 1,000,000 people try Proactive Plus risk-free and get 2 free gifts, and also receive free shipping when you call right now. Call 800-393-6272. That's 800-393-6272.
Good afternoon, and welcome to Justice for All. I'm George Yates, your host, and I'll be here for the next hour from 2 to 3 here on WK Talk Radio here, 1650 AM WHKT here in beautiful downtown Chesapeake, Virginia. If you are riding down the road or you are sitting around listening to the radio and you're listening to our show today, the phone number is 454-1650. If you want to call in, have a comment or a question of our guest today, then you feel free to give us a call. That's 454-1650, and that's WHKT in here in Chesapeake. So if you don't remember the number, you Google that on your phone and give us a call. Because my guest today is Paul Mungo, and he's the proprietor of a business here in Virginia. Actually, he's in Virginia Beach, and it's called Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia. He also has another company called Testing Teens for Drugs. And he's a drug tester. He's an expert in this whole idea of drug tests. These days, we have so many people with problems with drugs, both in the criminal justice system. We have truck drivers out on the road that need to be tested in order to know that they're being sober while they're driving their vehicles. Many employers have drug testing programs to make sure that their employees are not high or under the influence of drugs. We have the military, of course, routinely will test its members. So that and many other reasons, many of the reasons we're trying to keep drugs out of people's systems. And since drugs are such a prevalent part of society today, the drug tester is a very important person in that whole, really the whole social fabric of employers and military and so on. So his name is Paul Mungo, and he's here with me in the studio. I'd like to welcome him to the show. How you doing, Paul?
Hey, I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on. And once again, the phone number is 454-1650. If you have a call for Paul, we'll take your calls depending on whether or not they're good calls. So we might just shut you off if it's stupid questions. But anyway, Paul, let's just get started. What is drug testing? When someone gets tested for drugs, what are the various options? We know about urine tests, hair tests. Tell us what the various things that you test. How do you test for drugs?
Most of what I do is hair follicle testing. The most popular test is a urine-based test. There's also nail testing, saliva testing, and blood testing. But blood testing is not used nearly as much as it used to be.
And let's talk about the most popular, because you're talking urine testing, right?
Right, that's the most used.
It's the most used because it's the cheapest and the fastest to check, right?
I'd say that's fair, yeah.
And so, what is a urine test, and what are you testing for when you test somebody's urine?
Typically, 5-panel is the most common test. Maybe you would even call it a standard test. 5-panel has a PCP screen on it, marijuana, cocaine, amphetamine, and opiates.
And why would somebody be coming and getting a urine test? What's the main reason for it? Main
reason is probably pre-employment drug testing.
Pre-employment drug testing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times if people want to get a job, right, the employer says you have to take a test and pass.
Yeah, and a lot of times they have random tests. A lot of companies say they have random testing, but you talk to the employees and they haven't been tested in years. So
yeah, and is that usually a urine test?
In most cases, absolutely.
So let's say this person comes in. Do they have a little advance warning that they've got to go take this test?
Well, for the pre-employment, they do. For the random testing, they should not have any warning.
For a lot of these employers, if they take a test, let's say they'll come in and take a urine test, do they do random testing after that? Is that usually the only time they test them? They say, well, you're negative now, you're hired, and that's it.
I would say the majority of companies, if you polled them, they would say they do random testing. The reality is most of them don't follow through either at all or even a fraction of what they said they're supposed to.
Uh-huh. And random testing is really the only way to ensure that somebody's going to keep clean, right?
Absolutely. That's by far the best way. You don't give them any warning. It is what it is. They provide the sample pretty much on the spot, and the results will be accurate if that's the case.
So, and just for the fun of it, I know that everybody that hears about this drug testing thing, marijuana is such a prevalent drug in society today. There's so many people that smoke it, and then they want to try to beat the test, and so they can get hired, or it stays in your. Tell us about how people might want to beat it. First of all, marijuana, and how long does marijuana stay in your system?
Well, 2 to 5 weeks. I mean, that's a huge range. People say 30 days, give or take. It depends on your metabolism, the strength of the marijuana as far as the THC levels, and how often that you smoke it, really.
Right. So if somebody comes in and takes can you beat a urine test? Is there a way to, if you know that you have to go take the test and you've been using drugs, is there a way to kind of still pass the test?
There is, and I'm really going on what clients have told me over the years. I have plenty of clients buy tests because they're testing before they go in for the pre-employment tests, and they want to see if their levels are okay, and they just tried this solution or that solution they bought off the website or at a health food store. Some claim it works well, some claims it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but I know for a fact some of them do work. They don't. I would say it's fair to say they don't work as well on average as what they say they work because they're trying to sell you a product. But they do work. It probably gives you a window that would help you. And I would say if you're borderline, it's going to be a lot more effective to help you. If you were going to be 10 times the cutoff level, even if it drops your levels, you're still going to be positive, and that's all that matters.
But then some of these people will try to take things like to mask it or to dilute whatever's in their system, and then that'll end up being a failed test, right? Because you can show that in the urine that you've been watering down your urine, or how does that work?
If it's a lab-based test, yeah, a lot of companies will do a lab-based test or at least a lab backup. And if that's the case, an adulterated test, depending on, let's say it's a business, depending on their policy, they're going to make you redo it, or they're going to look at it as a positive. They're going to assume that you tried to cheat it. So it just depends on what the company policy is. And then there are people that try to use other people's urine. You know, if it's not a random test and they know they're going to take the test, they have time to prepare, they're either going to try to mask it or try to use someone else's urine.
Okay, if you're using someone else's urine, how does that work?
Well, there's a few ways that can work. They getting a little graphic here. For men, they even have something that looks like a fake testicle. Some people have to take an observed test. So the collector's supposed to be watching the urine leave the body and go right into the cup. And some people will even try to cheat that by having a fake testicle they're trying to hide with their hand, and then like a little tiny hose attached to it where they're trying to hide with their hand as well and kind of squeeze the urine out. And then for the women, there's a type of balloon that they'll actually insert in them with that little hose sticking out again and try to use someone else's urine.
We have a lot of military members in Hampton Roads area, and I know that a lot of them will get booted out of the military if they test positive. Is there ever a time where maybe somebody does test positive for, let's say, urine analysis, and it's a false positive? How does that happen, if at all? I know
with lab testing, there are backups, so you're really not going to get a false positive with lab testing. So it's hard to make a claim that the science messed it up. Usually if someone's going to say, hey, I didn't do it, I know I didn't do it, they're going to try to blame the chain of custody. They're going to try to say somehow, some way, someone either added something to my urine or it's not my urine or something like that. But the science is sound, so they go after the chain of custody.
What about these people that say, I didn't smoke it myself, but I must have been around some people that did, and that's how I've got this positive for marijuana in my urine?
I've had a lot of parents come to me over the years and either come to my office or call and say, hey, is that the case? And I say, you're going to have to be in a small room with a lot of smoke for a very long period of time. And basically, they will have gotten stoned from it if they're going to test positive. And then I'll ask the parent, is it really any better that they're in that environment compared to smoking it themselves? They're still around it. They're still ingesting it. So I don't think one is any better than the other, personally.
So when people come to you and say someone tests positive, it's chain of custody. That's it. There's not going to be a mistake made.
The science is sound, especially with the lab testing. That's why we use it as a backup.
I know this is probably a question that very few people can answer, and it's probably different for every single person out there. But you've been doing this now for many years, testing for drugs and alcohol and so on. Why do people abuse drugs and alcohol in your opinion?
I hear a lot of what I call stories about why people do it. In this business, it's kind of like being a bartender sometimes. You get people to really open up without even trying. People just come, and I think for the most part, they're very honest. My main experience with drug use has been through my brother. My brother used various forms of drugs from 14 until 44 until he overdosed and died. And just my experience with him and his friends, I've known a lot of drug users over the years. And this is what I tell parents. This is my belief. A lot of parents come and they feel guilty that their son or daughter is abusing drugs. They feel responsible. And I say, it's going to sound philosophical, but this is what I believe. I think, as humans, we all have our own problems. We all believe we're not good enough. We don't belong. Basically, that not good enough, that void, I call it, that void within us, we all fill that void, that emptiness with something. For some people, it's sex, work, could even be running or reading. Anything we do to avoid dealing with ourselves. And for a lot of people, it's drugs and alcohol. But I tell people the cause is the same. We all have our thing, whether you're filling the void with food or drugs or you run. It's anything to not deal with that void. So when I'm with people, I don't have a problem. If someone's a drug user, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they deal with that void in a way that really doesn't work, and a lot of times doesn't work for people around them.
And you say you deal with parents a lot whose kids are using drugs, and you actually have a company that's called www.testingteensfordrugs.com. What's your experience with parents and drugs with their children?
Well, a lot of guilt when people come in, and that website is there as a resource for parents. It gives parents really anything and everything you need as a parent, either on the site or a link to it, to really educate you. And the purpose behind it mostly is the best excuse you can give your child to say no to someone is when they say, no, I can't try this because my parents test me. It gives them the ultimate out of saying no against peer pressure. And the reality is, unless you're randomly testing, if you ask someone if they're taking drugs and they're not, they're going to say they're not. And in most cases, if they are, at least initially, they're going to say no. And I've had a lot of parents, and I tell this to parents sometimes, put them in a car, tell them you're coming down here. And they might still tell you no. And by the time you get here, I'm going to say at least 25% of the time, they'll come clean before they walk through my door. I tell parents you should still come in, because if they say they're doing marijuana, they could be doing marijuana and cocaine. So you still want to do the test anyway, and then you be proactive from that point forward and give them a reason not to take it. And in real life, there are consequences. A lot of people lose their jobs, so let them know there are going to be consequences. And if you go to that website, testingteensfordrugs.com, I have a section called the Family Pledge, and it's basically the cliff notes of what you would need. I have a longer ebook that I co-wrote on there as well. But on there, the Family Pledge is like a contract that you signed. I got the idea from Derek Jeter, actually. He talked about how he had a contract with his father not to do drugs. And as a family, they all signed this agreement that we don't smoke, we don't do drugs, we don't drink, whatever it is that you choose as a family. And there are consequences if you get caught. And, for sometimes, hey, you start paying rent. You're 18, you don't have a right to be here. I don't have to let you stay here. You pay rent, pay your car insurance, lose your privileges. Really hit them where it hurts, bottom line. Let them know their consequences. But more importantly, let them know that you care and you use it as a way to come together as a family.
If you just joined us, I'm here with Paul Mungo, and he is the director of Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia. He's also the director of TestingTeensForDrugs.com. And the call number here is 454-1650. If you have a question for Paul regarding drug testing or drugs in general, please give us a call, and we'll take your call on the air here. We're live here from K-Talk Radio here, 1650 AM. And so this family pledge, that's interesting. Is that on that website then, Testing Teens for Drugs?
Yeah, you can actually copy and paste it.
That's
I have
cool.
a lot of ideas on there, so you can take out what you don't want, add what you do want, and just put it in your own Word document, basically.
So, in this drug testing, you say it works best if it's random because, obviously if somebody comes in and tests negative and then they get the job and then they're never being tested again, well, now they can just go use. But you've got some statistics here talking about how commercial truck drivers have been tested now for many years, and 10 years after mandatory drug testing, because they are randomly tested now, all commercial truck drivers, right?
DOT guidelines.
Right. And now we have a positive rate of only 3% among commercial truck drivers because they know they're going to get tested.
Yeah, and that was opposed to 18% prior to that.
Yeah, but I mean, my band plays that song, by Little Feat. It's called Willin'. I mean, what about that? That song where he goes, weed, whites, and wine? He says, I've driven every kind of rig that's ever been made. Driven the back road so I wouldn't get weighed. Of course, he's sort of an illegal truck driver to begin with, right? He's trying to avoid the scales. But he's drinking weed. He's weed, whites, and wine. So he's got pot, a little wine, and a little what? What are the whites? It's amphetamines, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, but those days are over, right? That song was written before mandatory drug testing for commercial truck drivers.
I hope they're over. Let's put it that way.
That's one of my favorite songs. I love that song. But anyway, well, listen, you're a real expert in what they call hair testing, right? I mean, you said earlier in the show that hair follicle testing or whatever, hair strand testing is the most reliable form of drug test. What is that? How does that work?
Basically, I take about 150 strands of hair. I cut as close as I can to the scalp, and I take it from a few spots around the crown of the head. So, I'm not leaving a big bald spot or anything. And every half inch of hair represents about 30 days of worth of growth. When you ingest drugs, in whatever form you're ingesting the drugs, your body metabolizes it, and that metabolite is registered in your hair. It goes through your blood. The blood feeds your hair, and it gets registered in your hair. So the standard test is 1.5 inches. So as long as you have at least 1.5 inches of hair, they'll cut it back to 1.5 inches when it gets to the lab, and that represents about a 90-day sample. And then they measure the metabolites in the hair, and it goes anywhere from that standard 5-panel I talked about earlier all the way up to 15 or more different drugs. So there's quite a variety you can test for.
And you can test for alcohol, too.
Yeah, alcohol is a little bit newer. It's been used in Europe for quite a while. I've kind of made my rounds in Hampton Roads. It's becoming more and more popular. Alcohol is a bigger problem than all the drugs combined as far as abuse goes. So the alcohol test for hair, first of all, hair isn't as sensitive as urine-based tests. So it's used, it's like that by design. So you have to be more of a moderate to heavy user. If you use drugs, say 2 or 3 times, even a decent amount, there's a good chance you'll still come up negative on a hair test. But if you're more of a regular user, you're going to come up positive, and it'll give you the level. You can't put a lot of weight into the level because it's a 90-day snapshot. So we don't know if you just went crazy for a week or you did a little bit every week for 90 days. But a positive is a positive. Now with alcohol, it's a binge or heavy abuse type positive result. So you have to be someone that gets intoxicated. They say, at least 6 times in 90 days. I mean, the science isn't exact as far as, well, the science is exact, but everyone's body's different. They metabolize different depending on your weight and things like that. But if you have 3 drinks a day for all 90 days, there's a good chance you're still going to come up negative if you spread them out, especially. It's testing for more of those binge drinking episodes, which for men is 5 or more drinks in 2 hours or less. For women, it's 4 or more drinks in 2 hours or less. So at that point, you're going to be intoxicated at some level, and that gets registered in your hair at a much greater level. So they're measuring that alcohol content metabolite in your hair. They call ETG. So if you get a positive on that, you are someone that gets impaired because of drinking. And when it comes to custody cases, 95% of the hair follicle clients I have are because of custody cases. Someone accusing someone else of doing drugs or alcohol.
And so, but you can still drink, and be over the legal limit or something like that, and still test negative. You're talking about really heavy binge drinking in order for that to show up.
Yeah, if you drink, like you just said, for 6 or more times, there's a good chance you're going to be positive. If you just do it once or twice or 3 or 4 times in a 3-month period, good chance you'll be negative.
Right. So, you're not the lab person. You're the person that actually does the actual sampling and sending it off to the lab. But you do the urinalysis yourself sometimes.
Well, with an instant test, and basically I'm just reading the cup will indicate a positive or negative. So there's really no science behind it. It's just a collection process.
What are now the specialized hair testing? You got 7 to 15 drug panels. You've got 7 panel, 9 panel, 12 panel, 14 panel, 15 panel. What kind of drugs do you test for? I mean, list all the drugs that people can use and you can get tested for.
Well, God, I mean, that list.
I see amphetamines, cannabinoids, that's marijuana, cocaine, opiates, which includes all sorts of stuff, right?
Painkillers mostly, yeah.
Codeine, hydrocodone, all prescription drugs, right?
Right.
And then phenylcyclidine.
PCP. I mean, I don't even know why that's part of the main test anymore.
Do people still use that?
Not as much. I mean, it's less than 2% of the positives. So
yeah, I mean that was a drug from years ago, right? That's kind of like the old. What was it called? That angel dust or something?
Yeah. The benzodiazepines. I think if I was in charge, I would replace the PCP with that, and that's more of an abused prescription medication.
Okay, and what are those benzodiazepines?
I think in large part they're anti-anxiety medications, things people take to sleep as well.
Yeah, I mean the problem with a lot of times is people will take these kinds of drugs and they're good for. I mean they're prescribed for people, right? Why is this part of are they being abused too? Is that what this is all about? Because people can get these drugs legally.
Well, honestly, if they have a prescription that's valid in their name, even if they come up positive, the positive is going to be changed to a negative. There's a process to protect against the false positives. So when I get a positive result, it goes to a medical review officer. And they're trained doctors and their assistants that know which prescriptions will cause a positive for which drug. So if you're on a valid prescription, you don't have to worry about a false positive. Now, if you're abusing it, it almost gives you permission to abuse it, honestly. So that's between the doctor and their patient.
Right.
But a lot of people, they'll sell their prescriptions. So a lot of people are taking these valid prescriptions, as far as their legal drugs, but they don't have a valid prescription for it, and that's what we're catching.
And what are barbiturates? You've got them number 7 here on your list.
I can't even pronounce.
Amobarbitol, butylbitol, pentobarbital, phenobarbital, and secobarbital. Okay.
There are over 2,000 drugs. Honestly,
I used to hear about a drug called Quaaludes. Is that included in that group there? The Quaalude, that's a barbiturate, right?
I believe so, yeah. And then methadone is the next one there.
Right.
It's a heroin blocker, basically, but people get hooked to that and start abusing that instead of the heroin.
Right, yeah. And then you've got prepoxyphene.
Yeah.
Oxycodone, which has become very common lately. Very abused lately. Meperidine. And normeperidine, tramadol, fentanyl, which is sort of a heroin type drug now, right? And fentanyl's a real.
It's in that category.
Yeah,
and I believe that last one,
sufentanil.
Yeah, and then the date rape one, ketamine.
Is ketamine the date rape drug?
That's one of them.
I thought they were okay.
The problem is people don't usually take that in enough of a dose to be caught in a hair follicle test. So it has to be more than once, typically.
Right. So you can test for all 15 of these in one test?
Yep.
And that's a $419 charge. I see the charges here.
Yeah.
The 7-panel test is $189. The 9-panel test, $229. The 12-panel test, $299, and on up. We're going to take a short break here. We're going to take a little commercial break. We'll be right back with Paul Mungo with Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia. The phone number is 454-1650. Give us a call and ask Paul a question if you're interested in anything about drug testing and drugs in general. We'll be right back.
The place for authentic Indian food is the India Palace. They feature authentic Indian cuisine, have a party hall, and do catering and banquets. Open daily for lunch and dinner, they showcase an excellent lunch buffet at their Chesapeake and Virginia Beach locations. Visit their 2 locations at 1437 Sam's Drive in Chesapeake off of Battlefield Boulevard and 5600 Virginia Beach Boulevard in Virginia Beach, and online at IndiaPalaceVB.com. On Facebook, look for India Palace Virginia Beach and India Palace Bar and Grill. Dine at the India Palace today.
Leaky faucet, refinishing old countertops? Hey, Gary Sullivan here. Perhaps you're restaining a deck or painting your living room. Whatever it is, let me help. I'm here to give you the tips you need to finish those pesky projects you've been putting off. If you're restaining, have a tip for that. Can't get the paint off the hardwood floors? Got a tip for that too. I'm here to make sure that $5 repair doesn't turn into a $500 repair. Join me right here every weekend.
Saturdays at noon, Sundays at 9 a.m. on AM 1650 WHKT, The Answer.
Hi, this is Greg Picaveros, inviting you to join me for Sports Scene live each Wednesday from noon to 1 right here on News Talk 1650 and TuneIn.com by typing WHKT.
CBS News Update. Flames continue to scorch huge swaths of land in California. Cal Fire spokesman Dennis Matheson.
We're about 1,400 fires more than last year or even an average year.
A small army of men and women at the front lines. Shauna Lagarza, fire director for the Forest Service in California.
I would say now we probably have over 8,000 firefighters across the state of California working, and we're bringing in additional firefighters are coming in from the East Coast, and we are also bringing in crews from the southwest part of the country.
There have been problems with people trying to get their own close-up views of the flames.
Sometimes in the past couple of months, we've had a few unauthorized drones that come over the wildland fires, and that's really a safety hazard for our aviation and ground people that are working on the fires.
Governor Brown has declared a state of emergency. CBS News Update. I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Hi, this is Greg Picaveros, inviting you to join me for Sports Scene live each Wednesday from noon to 1 right here on News Talk 1650 and TuneIn.com by typing WHKT in the search box. Excellent guests and interaction at Greg Bick on Twitter, all powered by HamptonRoadsOnlineMall.com. Sports Scene each Wednesday from noon to 1 right here on News Talk 1650.
Mi Hogar is your restaurant for the finest Mexican cuisine in Hampton Roads. At Mi Hogar, everything is prepared fresh in a casual atmosphere. Enjoy traditional favorites such as quesadillas, tacos, burritos, and fajitas, as well as refreshing beverages. Mi Hogar has 2 locations, 4201 Granby Street in Norfolk and 801 North Battlefield Boulevard in Chesapeake. Call ahead at 640-7705. At Mi Hogar, there is something for everyone.
The best of News Talk Radio, AM 1650 WHKT Portsmouth, The Answer.
Okay, we're back, and this is George Yates, and we're in the last 30 minutes of Justice for All today. We're here with Paul Mungo of Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia, and we've been talking about drug tests and hair follicle testing and urine testing and all this kind of stuff for drugs, which has become so common in the modern world with, pre-employment tests, and truck drivers have to be tested, military gets tested. If you're on any kind of probation, you got to get tested. These days, most people that get charged with any kind of a crime and at least in my experience down in Virginia Beach or in most of these cities, you are put on some kind of, if you're on a bond, you get pretrial release program, and you're tested in conjunction with your pretrial release. Most of those are urine tests. And Paul does some of that, but we've been talking a little bit about this hair follicle testing and how it's what's interesting about the hair follicle test as opposed to the urine test, Paul, is, and you've told me this in the past, that you can smoke a little marijuana here and there, and it might not show up on a test, even a urine test or a hair follicle test. It's sort of like there has to be kind of a threshold, right? In other words, if someone's not a really heavy user, they're just a one-timer or two-timer, they might not show up positive on a hair test, right?
On a hair test, it's likely it'll be negative if that's the case.
Yeah.
Usually it's 2, 3, 4 times in whatever time period is tested, and it depends on their metabolism and the strength and how much they used.
How about on a urine test, just a 1 or 2 times with marijuana?
Yeah, again, it depends on the THC levels, but it's possible. The more you do, I mean, we have the sheet in front of us. It says 14 to 40 days for marijuana. So the more that you do, the more often you do it, and the strength of the THC will factor in, going from 14 to 40 days or even longer sometimes.
Right. Now,
it's always a range.
Right. Now, you also really help. We've talked about earlier about parents using your services because they want to kind of keep their children off drugs. And you talked about that family pledge. That was a Derek Jeter thing, huh? That's
right.
Pretty cool. He's a role model for a lot of people. I think that was interesting, that whole contract. A lot of us didn't know that, I think, until his final year. He mentioned that. How do you say so clean? I had a contract with my dad. A lot of us didn't know that about Jeter back in the 90s when we first. It was only recently we found that out. What is the pledge? Do you know what it is? How do people get a hand on that family pledge?
Well, go to the testingteensfordrugs.com website, and there's a section at the top called the Family Pledge. Just click on that, scroll down, you'll see an example of it. And copy and paste it, keep what you want, add what you don't want. And it literally is like a contract in your family where everyone signs it, you get on the same page. And it's,
so the parents sign it too, so the parents say they're not going to do drugs either.
Whatever they agree to. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Because a lot of times these days, it's the parents that are the biggest problem. We've got so many parents out there that are abusing prescription drugs, and you're sending kind of the bad example to the children.
I have a lot of parents have told me, look, when I was their age, I did this, and I feel like a hypocrite for doing this.
Right.
I say, look, you learn from the mistakes. You can be honest about that, or you can leave that out. But for me, it's an opportunity to be honest with your kid, and I think for the most part it works to say, look, I was human, right? I made my mistakes. I don't want you to make the same mistakes. This is a different world today. Back in my day, we would stay out at night. We wouldn't worry. We weren't worried about people messing with the drugs and people dying of overdoses because someone spiked their drink or their drugs with something. It's a different world. And bottom line, just like an employer is responsible for what his or her employee does, a parent can be responsible for what their child does. So, you have a vested interest in them not messing up.
We really are in a different world. I was driving over here today, and I was talking with my daughter who came to the studio with me today, and we were talking about driving and how difficult it is. She says, there's a lot to driving because when we drive our cars, and we've been doing it for a long time, and it's easy for us because we've been doing it, but 16, 17-year-old, we've changed the rules for them too. I mean, it used to be when we were 17, we could drive around with all our buddies in the car and do all that. Now, if you're 17, you can't have any more than one person in the car, and they got to be related to you if you want to have any more than that. We've changed a lot of the rules in the modern world because I guess we've learned from our mistakes that the 17-year-old kids with 3 buddies in the car died, and we don't want that to happen to our kids. So we're doing it different. So just because we did it that way doesn't mean that we have to tell our kids that it's okay for them to do it that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
the drinking age was 18 back in the day too. We raised the drinking age to 21. And so now you've got all these guys, but so many kids between 18 and 20 are still in college. They're still drinking, and they're really breaking the law because they're drinking beer at 18, 19, and 20. How do we do that? I mean, how do we tell these kids that just do as I say and not as I did?
Well, I think, my opinion is just honesty is the best policy, and you frame it as a mistake. It's something that you did, and in hindsight, you wish you wouldn't have done it, or if you had a chance to do it over. Or, for some people, it's like, it was a different time. Nowadays, we make a federal case out of everything. I mean, there's 24-hour news everywhere. I think decades ago, parents wouldn't make a big deal out of it. Nowadays, I mean, you probably know about this and heard about this a lot more than me. If someone's child was doing drugs at someone else's home, that parent's going to blame the other parent. I mean, we're in a very litigious society right now. So just a lot in general has changed. The stakes seem higher, and the drugs are different as well. Marijuana today is like 10 to 20 times stronger than it was, say, back in the 70s. So it's a different world in many respects.
Well, the heroin that's going around now is scary. I was just I had a drug case just yesterday, and I've been talking with some prosecutors about the fact that there have been so many overdoses, heroin overdoses, and deaths lately because of the powerful drugs that are out there.
That's how my brother died, heroin overdose.
Was it? Yeah. And now, tell me about that, because we have the Corey Monteith, we've got the Philip Seymour Hoffman. We've got these movie stars that die of these heroin overdoses a lot of times because they get rehab, they get off of the drugs for a while, and then they go back when they relapse. Is that what happened to your brother, or
very much so? My brother,
they go back to the same dose when they relapse, and they're not ready for it.
My brother only did marijuana for probably 10 or 12 years, and he said he would never put a needle in his arm. Well, he had a DUI or DWI. Back in New York, we call it DWI. And he had a probation officer at one point, and he still wanted to get high. That was his vice. That's how he avoided life. And he couldn't do marijuana anymore because back then, the way they did random, which is not the way you should do it, he knew if he was going in on a Thursday, he could be tested. So he couldn't do marijuana anymore, but he knew he could do cocaine or heroin Friday and Saturday, go in Thursday, and still test negative. So
because
the
heroin and the other drugs come out of your system in 48 hours, right, or 72 at the most.
Typically, yeah.
So it's easy to do those other drugs and not get detected. Your probation officer might say, "Okay, come in tomorrow for a drug test, but hey, you just last used on Thursday." So I'm probably going to be okay. Maybe if I can just hold them off for one more day, and it'll be out of my system, right? So that's what he was doing. He switched over to other more powerful drugs. Oh my gosh,
he did, and eventually, he had a child, and he stopped doing heroin for, I'm going to say, a couple of years. Then he went back to marijuana, and then he was on methadone for a while, and then he got off the methadone. He moved to Virginia, was here for a while, then he went back to New York to visit his buddies. Apparently partied it up in New York, brought heroin back with him, and the next morning overdosed and died while my niece was downstairs watching TV.
So was he shooting it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Dropped straight down. My niece found him, and my father called, and my niece said, I can't wake Daddy up, and he went over there, and he said the way he found him, he just dropped straight down. I mean, whatever he put in his veins was way too much, and he just dropped straight down almost in a sitting position. So he, like you said, probably did what he used to do, and his body couldn't handle it. He had no resistance to it anymore.
Yeah, Keith Richards, in his autobiography, it's called Life, and of course he was a heroin user for more than 10 years, and he managed to avoid overdosing. And when some of his friends, Graham Parsons among them, overdosed, and Keith Richards understood the dosage. He said the reason why he never did overdose was because when he did lay off for a while, he did not come back to his same dose. He was smart enough to know that, but a lot of other people will not use for the longest time, and they come back, they go back to their regular dose, and it kills them. Or, as we're seeing now, these people are going to their regular dose, but the drug is now, instead of 40%, it's 70%, 90% powerful. Boom, it's killing people. It's a really scary thing going on right now. And in our whole area right now, it's the biggest drug problem we have right now is the heroin that's in the area.
Yeah, and I think that probably causes more deaths than anything. And, I've talked to a lot of drug users and junkies, I guess you would say, and I remember some being adamant. They say it's a disease. When you talk to the users, most of them basically say that's BS. I mean, they know it's their choice, and maybe some people are more prone to it than others, so-called addictive personalities, if you will. But for my brother, it was a choice. He always said it was a choice.
Yeah, calling it a disease is sort of a cop-out, isn't it? It allows people to avoid responsibility. Oh, I have this disease, as if I've got bad eyesight or something. It's a choice that you have to make.
It becomes a habit that's hard to break. But at some point, it was absolutely a conscious choice. And most of the people I've spoken to, I mean, they are where they're at because of the choices they made.
If you've just joined us, I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All. I'm here with Paul Mungo, and he's got Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia, testing teens for drugs. And also, you have two other websites, Paul. What are those? Let's see. Paternity testing of Virginia, and you also have what's this, hair follicle testing? Oh, so hair follicle testing in Virginia. That's just a separate.
I've got links to all of them from my main website, which is drugtestingsolutionsofvirginia.com.
Well, now, paternity testing in Virginia, then you must be on, the Maury Povich show all the time. Isn't that, I don't get home too often in the afternoon to watch daytime TV, but whenever I do, it seems like every one of those shows is about, some guy who's really not his baby's daddy. Tell me about that. I mean, we've been talking about drug testing, but you also do paternity testing, so tell us about that.
Yeah, it creates some interesting stories. A lot of people get the non-legal one first. And sometimes I think that's wise. I mean, you don't cause a problem until you know there is one. And I've had people, I'll give them, it's basically like a long Q-tip. And they'll ask to hold the baby in the hospital, and they'll swab the cheek. They turn their back and swab the cheek and bring back the sample. But there's a lot of interesting stories and drama when it comes to that. And again, it's interesting. It's like being a bartender. People just start opening up and telling you stuff. I wish I would have, recorded or written some things down and changed the names, because I would have had a very entertaining book by now.
So tell us about some of the stories. You're saying that when someone comes into your office for the first time, and the father, let's say the putative father, the father whose name is on the birth certificate,
alleged father, yeah.
the father whose name is on the birth certificate, you say you can tell that he has just recently been informed by the baby's mother that he might not be the father, and they're coming in for testing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the attitude tends to be a little bit different. Sometimes people are in there. One person might be military, and to get the baby on the benefits, you have to do a legal DNA test before they're allowed to be on the benefits. And they come in there, and they're a very happy couple. And then you get another couple that walks in with a child, and you can tell by the look on the alleged father's face that he just found out he's the alleged father. And, it's an uncomfortable situation. But for the most part, people really do take responsibility for it. And sometimes the mother leaves first, and he's sitting there pissed off, and he just starts talking. And, bottom line is people are going to be people. But I think in most cases they want to do the best thing for the child. And that's my concern, too.
So you say you feel like you're a bartender. I mean, you're in your office because you've got these people who are coming in with these very serious issues in their lives, right? Drugs and paternity and all of that.
Child custody, that's a lot of what I do.
And so what, while they're getting their hair cut, or they're doing they just kind of unload on you, like they're asking you for pour me another one, Paul.
Sometimes people just need someone to talk to, and they're doing my thing, and they start talking. And I decided to specialize in hair follicle testing, and that really is my specialty. About a year and a half ago, I've been doing this about 6 years. And I'm good with upset people. I'm not judging people. I grew up, I always loved my brother. I think he was a good guy. He had a good heart, and he just had, his vice was very destructive. I mean, he went into coma 3 times before he finally died, so spread out throughout the years. So people have their problems, and some people aren't willing to give them up. And, my message, especially to the parents, is you love them anyway, and you got to have it so it works for you as well. I've done interventions on other family members. And bottom line is people will not do anything about the problem until they are ready. And sometimes it's, a child gives them the incentive to do the right thing. Sometimes it's a job that has them, get off a drug because they want to keep their job. And sometimes it's just time. So, as a loved one, you be there for them the best you can, but you don't let your life get destroyed by their life. That's important.
What do you say to the people that will come and say, oh, well, marijuana, let's say, is legal now in D.C., and it's legal and very close to us here in Virginia, and it's legal in many states now for medical use. It's, of course, legal in Colorado and Washington now for any kind of recreational use. What do you say to people that say, well, gee, I went to Colorado and I caught a buzz while I was there, and now I'm going to test positive here in Virginia? Maybe you ever getting people that say that talk like that and wonder why in the world I'm being tested at all, or why is this? How can this be fair? Because it's legal somewhere else and it's not legal here. What do you say to that? Because employers can still decide these kinds of things as to whether they want to test.
Well, I say it's like alcohol. I mean, alcohol used to be illegal, and it's been legal for a very long time, but you still can't drink and be at work. And there are some. But isn't that the problem? Because drink,
alcohol, I can go home and drink 3 or 4 glasses of wine or whatever, and eat a nice big meal, and go to bed, sleep like a baby, get up the next morning. I'm 0-0. I drive my car. I haven't. What do you say? But marijuana, the person could go smoke or whatever the next day. They're not under the influence of it anymore, or even the next week, and they come in maybe even 2 weeks later and they test positive for marijuana and lose their job over it, when in fact they're not under the influence of anything, and it didn't affect their job performance in any way. So there's a lot of, and that's kind of fundamentally unfair, I think, that we're going to single out people for that. And you mentioned earlier at the top of the show that alcohol was probably the most abused of all of these things that are on the panel, right. Because it's so prevalent, it's so easy to get. But it's the one that's the quickest out of your system. So how do we reconcile these? We really don't treat these drugs fairly, in my opinion. But what do you think?
I think when it comes to work, at least, like if you work on an oil rig, they have a 0 drinking policy where they're going to do hair follicle testing, and I think they have deals with labs to set it up at a lower cutoff. They don't want anyone working on an oil rig that drinks at all, period. Now, as far as marijuana goes and other drugs, there are a lot of studies that show the next day you actually are impaired. Like they put pilots in flight simulators.
Right.
And it's a measurable difference. So a lot of people think they are not impaired when in actuality they are impaired.
Well, I've thought about that before, and that's a good question, because if it's still in your system, then maybe you are still impaired. That is, so is it conceivable that if you have THC anywhere in your system that it's still affecting you?
At some level. Now, as far as for how long,
right.
There's so many variables. There are good scientific studies that show the next day, absolutely, even 2 days, but then you're getting, depending on how stoned you were, how the strength of THC, but 1 day, absolutely. And even with alcohol, you come in dehydrated the next day. When you wake up, if anyone's ever had a hangover, you know that you are impaired, with the hangover until you rehydrate yourself and maybe get something to eat. So,
definitely
depends on the person,
right? No doubt about that. In fact, my analogy I made a little while ago, 3 to 4, that was probably that's too high. You start getting actually to 4 drinks, and that's binge drinking even for a male, isn't it?
For a female, yeah. For 5 is for a male, and that's 2 hours or less.
Yeah, but still, maybe it's my age, but I know if 3, you're getting there. You start going to 4, it's probably you're going over. I think that anything over 3 for men probably ought to be considered it. But yeah, but you're saying it's 4 for men, and anything. I read
5 for men, 4 for women.
I read once where the National Institute of Health said that anybody that drinks, for men, it's any more than 14 drinks in a week. And any time you drink 4 or more drinks in any one sitting, but you're saying it's 5, up to 5.
For men, it's 5 and 2 hours or less. For women, it's 4.
Something that's interesting about alcohol, women actually, because they have less water in their bodies, for the same amount of weight, actually will register higher for alcohol than men. Is that figured in on your testing at all?
The 5 drink and 4 drink, that's the official definition, but it does depend on your weight. You have a 100-pound woman or a 250-pound woman, there absolutely is going to be a difference in how that 4 drinks affects them. So it's not a steadfast rule. It's just a general rule.
Mm-hmm. If you've just joined us, I'm here with Paul Mungo of Drug Testing Solutions of Virginia. The phone number is 454-1650 if you've got a question. If your child does test positive for drugs, I mean, what do your parents do? Let's say they bring the kid in and they don't know, right? The kid's been lying or saying that I'm not doing drugs, or maybe they even are saying they're doing one, but not all of them. And then you give them the results go to the parents. And what do parents do when they see that their kids are positive for these drugs? What are their options? Well,
of course, it depends on the parenting style. I mean, some parents think, they're invading their privacy to do a test, and that's the minority. I don't buy that argument at all. If you're the parent and you're responsible, you get to say. But I say
take away their iPhone,
whatever hit them,
the driver's license,
wherever it hurts. But if someone's taking cocaine, even if they claim it's a one-time deal, the odds of you catching someone after the first time is pretty slim. It takes the average person starts around 14 with drug use, and it takes the average parent almost 2 years to catch them.
Because they can't imagine their poor little 14-year-olds is using. Go ahead. So it takes them 2 years to catch them. Why? Because the kids are just so good at covering it up?
If they probably have to get lucky at the beginning, and then they get better and better at it.
How do parents ultimately catch them? What do they do? What's the signal?
Find something in their room, smell something on their breath, notice some behavior. There are definitely signs to look for. And there's a lot of good information out there. That's really what that website is for, the Testing Teens for Drugs. Just give parents an idea of what to look for. Give them the tools they need to be proactive. Being proactive is the most important thing. I don't care if your child's smoking or shooting something or not. Being proactive lets them know you care if you do it in the right way. It's not about busting your child and punishing them. I don't think that's what it should be about, at least.
And if you're a parent and once you've signed one of these Derek Jeter type agreements, these contracts, is random testing part of the contract?
Absolutely. That's the only thing that keeps it honest. It really is, and it has to be truly random. The pre-employment testing, it's still, depending on the source, about 8% positive. These are people that know they're going to be tested in most cases, and they still come in and they test positive. And some of them say, well, I was kind of hoping it was out of my system by then. I'll have to go for a different job, So, and I can't say the name of the university, but it was one of the universities in Hampton Roads. They did a department, and the entire department, they randomly tested for the first time in maybe decades. And they had, I think it was 23% positive, and then they had like 5 people quit. So they tested about 125 people. 5 or 6 quit on the spot. And then they had some people that had 25 years of service rings that tested positive because they didn't do the random. They could have done it the whole time, but they didn't. And when they surprised them with the random, they caught, about a quarter.
And this was a university?
Yeah, this was the staff of one of the universities here.
And the staff meaning professors and...
No, this was more of... Some of them were maintenance department. They weren't the professors. So there were 7 departments. They did one entire department. They had planned on doing them all, but after they got so many positives for the one, they stopped because they wouldn't have
losing half of the years.
Yeah.
Everybody was quitting.
They had to re-examine their policy. Yeah.
And so when you say they tested positive for drugs, what kind of drugs were they testing positive for?
That I'm not sure. I imagine most would be marijuana.
Right.
I'm not privy to all that information. This was third hand from a good source, someone that worked there that told me this.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing about marijuana is just at the moment in time that it is gaining so much more acceptability and legality, we're finding more dangerous things about it. It's not to say that it's in the class with these other ones. It's still, I don't believe, as dangerous as cocaine or alcohol in terms of what it can do. But that doesn't mean that it's this completely benign little herb that everybody wants to make it out to be. It can be especially the new marijuana, which is so powerful. So, I think it's important that we recognize it for what it is. It's still a potentially dangerous drug, and kids shouldn't be smoking. I mean, that just ought to be parents. That's a good pledge to have.
Yeah, I think so. And one thing we haven't talked about is saliva testing. That'll test for just about any drug, but it's the same timeline for every drug, anywhere from 14 to say 36 hours for most of the drugs. So as a parent, they come home from a party, they do it right in front of you. It's accurate. It's just a short snapshot, short time frame. And for employers as well, especially someone's in a safety sensitive position, you can test to see if there's something in their system right now, and I think knowing the basics of all the tests is important because you want to utilize a strategy that makes sense. Some people don't care if their employees are doing marijuana as long as they're not doing it on the job, and a saliva test is perfect. Same thing for alcohol. Do a saliva test. As long as they show up clean, you can work. If they're not clean, go home or you're fired.
We're going to leave it right there. I want to thank Paul Mungo for joining us today. If you've just joined us, this is Justice for All. I've been with Paul Mungo the last hour. Go online to drugtestingsolutionsofvirginia.com or testingteensfordrugs.com and learn more about what Paul Mungo can do to help you with the drug questions that you may have in your life. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm George Yates. Join us again next Saturday at 2 o'clock for another edition of Justice for All. Bye now.
There are 23 large fires burning, 8,000 firefighters.